Hey there, Dangastu here. In today's video we're going to look at replacing the dog clutch in a Tohatsu 40C. Today's video is going to be co-hosted by Matty from Auckland. Here Matt's ordered himself a new hydraulic steering, and so while he's waiting for that to do the install, he can help me with this. So the history of this outboard is that, amongst other things, it stopped going into reverse. Now, this is a pretty common problem, and I have done another video on this, and there's lots of different reasons it can happen. In the other video, we ended up machining the dog clutch and the gears, which I think is a really good option if you have that problem. But in this case, I couldn't get up to the machinist, and I could get a new clutch for it pretty easily. Interestingly, the gear's not particularly bad, the clutch itself was more warm. The plot thickened a little bit when I actually took it down to where I get Tohatsu parts from, and Lindsay, a bloke there, said, I think the dog clutch has actually been reversed. It had never been off that I'd seen, but somebody had previously swapped it around. They're not symmetrical, so he spotted that with a very keen eye, and I'm very glad he did. But it looks as though somebody's had a problem, they've sort of tried to favour the good side, probably just to keep forward working. But it meant the reverse has failed. Now, we got a new one, nice and easy. It wasn't actually that expensive from memory, so that's good as well, compared to the cost of actually heading up somewhere just a couple of hours to go to a machinist, let alone getting the machining done. So always look at the maths when you get these sorts of things fixed. Sometimes buying a part is cheaper than you think, sometimes it's way more than you think. So just have a look at your options before you decide which way to go. When I then took it apart, I noticed that the pin that holds the dog clutch in had actually broken in two. This gearbox obviously had problems beforehand. The clutch was quite worn, it had been swapped around. I would say, however, the day the gearbox stopped working is the day this pin actually split in two. So in this kit now, we've got pretty much a whole set of hardware to put in, from the dog clutch to springs, etc. So I'll show you what we've got, what we're going to do, and how we put it back together. Here's the prop shaft, nothing really wrong with that. Here's the old dog clutch that you can see there, hopefully, is very worn on those leading edges. The teeth here on the reverse gear are nowhere near as worn as the teeth on the clutch itself. So we're just going to be replacing the clutch and a few other bits and pieces that affect how well the clutch operates. At this point, some of you may be asking, shouldn't you replace everything at once so everything mates nicely with new surfaces? And the answer is possibly yes. I think though it depends a lot on what the outboard is. Is it a high performance outboard, a high power outboard? Do you do a lot of high speed running? How much is the outboard worth? How is the outboard used? All these kinds of things, I think, come into your decision about how far to go. I think the upshot is you can always go one more step. You can always replace all new parts, you can totally recondition a gearbox, but when your goal is to get from A to B and have reverse work when you get there, you set yourself a budget, you do a job that you know is going to last, even if it may not be the textbook ideal solution. So that's just my approach to most of these sorts of problems. And in case you want a second opinion, I asked Matt and he totally agrees. To start with, I'll put a few of the old parts aside and we'll look at what we're going to be reusing and what we're going to be replacing. So this is the unit that goes on the end of the spring that pin went through. We're not reusing that, and we're not reusing the spring. So I think this one's called the spring retainer, is actually what it's referred to in the service manual, and this is obviously the spring. There's another spring that goes around the clutch that holds that pin in, stops it falling out. This one we're not reusing either. We've got a new one of those. Obviously that pin that broke, we've got a brand new one of those, so we won't be using that again. So we've got the retainer, the spring, the locking pin. This is the pin that pushes against this spring retainer to push the clutch backwards and forwards, but you'll see that in a second. And the clutch itself. So none of those parts we're reusing. Here's a side view of the new dog clutch, and you can see here, that's the hole that locking pin goes through in the middle of it there. And if you come round, you can see it's not quite symmetrical. And so this side here is the reverse side. The reverse side extends further. So when this was installed, it was actually installed that way. So the side that extended further went towards forward, which is great because if forward's not working, yeah, okay, looks like it's a way to get it going again. but it actually made the reverse situation even worse. So with the new one, we're going to put it back in the right way. This is the prop shaft, and this is where the gear selector looks down. So the gear selector pushes down through here, and then this slotted section here is what allows the dog clutch to slide backwards and forwards. So the very first thing that goes in here is the new spring. So the 3 parts I'm going to take out is this locking pin, the new spring, and the spring retainer. The spring itself is pretty symmetrical, no big drama there, just pop that in. The retainer goes in with the flat side pointing outwards, so this side going towards the spring. Now what you need to do with that is have it so that the hole through it is lined up with the slot here and the prop shaft. Nothing really keys it in, so just sort of get it visually lined up, then pop that in. Then what I'm going to do is put the dog clutch on. I want the dog clutch to go where it extends the furthest, to the reverse side, and reverse is towards the prop, towards this end of the prop shaft. So the short end, this is the end towards forward. And I'm also going to slide that on, and this is keyed, so I'm going to slide this so that that hole that eventually locks it on is lined up. You can now see the spring through the slot. So once that hole's lined up, and the teeth on the spline are lined up, so that's the slot lined up and the dog clutch lined up. Now what we need to do is, and I may as well use the tool intended for that task, I guess, which is the push rod. So the spring's here and it's all the way out. If I put a bit of pressure on the spring, you'll see that retaining pin come through, and that's where that hole's lined up. So I want to get that really straight to the slot in the prop shaft, and then I'm going to put the dog clutch back on and put that pin through the dog clutch, through the spring retainer, and back out to the other side of the dog clutch. It's a bit of a fiddle, but you'll get there. So hopefully you can see through there. See, now you can see right through, and that's when I can put the pin. If I let the spring go a bit, it comes away. So you're looking to press the pin just enough to have that hole open up completely, and then drop the pin in. So once I can look down, it's all lined up. Drop the pin in. Then if I let the pressure, that'll hold the pin for now. So there we are. Spring retainer, dog clutch on, pin through, hold it all together. Now what we have is a spring like this that just goes around the outside, pretty much just to stop that pin falling out again. They've supplied a new one as a part of the kit for this job, and all I need to do is wind this in. The trick with these springs, in fact all these kinds of springs, is you want to get them on, but you don't want to really stretch them to get them on. So just try and wind them on as gently as you can, avoiding really overextending them or overexpanding them so they lose their strength. Springs are never easy things. What I'm going to do is just get this first edge hooked in here and then just start winding it on with a pair of pliers. And then obviously with these, the more you rotate the pliers and push the spring this way, the more you're actually sort of expanding the diameter of it, and that can make it easy to get on as well. So just wind it almost the opposite way to what you're thinking. Then once you've worked it to that point, you've sort of got it round the larger diameter, then you're really home and hosed, and you can just start pulling it all across. And then it'll spring in and sit quite nicely in that groove. So this is it assembled. Different models have little detent balls and all sorts of different things, so make sure that you know what's involved with your particular model of outboard. But this is getting pretty close to being ready to put back in. One of the common questions that got asked in the video I did on how an outboard gearbox works is how does the dog clutch get moved, forwards and backwards. And so I guess this video sort of answers that question in some ways, in that this little push rod or plunger, depends on the model what they call it, just goes in the center there, pushes that spring. So the spring's always pushing the dog clutch towards the forward gear. That's the job of the spring. And it's actually the gear selector that pushes to neutral and then beyond neutral into reverse. So the natural position the gearbox wants to be is actually in forward gear. So now when this prop shaft goes in, this edge will go towards the forward gear. This will go where the bearing is. This will go through to the gear selector coming down from above. And then when we put this bearing carrier back in, this will come on and slide up against here. So when we select reverse, we'll push all the way back in and this will start to engage. In order to do a kind of quick and dirty test of this, what I can do is just hang on to the bearing carrier, push the plunger towards reverse, start to rotate the gear, and we'll see the dog clutch turns too. So if I push it down and turn it, you can see that dog clutch is turning, which means reverse is engaged. Before this fix, that wasn't happening at all. It was actually just skimming it and wasn't making any real meaningful contact. So already we've got some confidence this is going to fix that problem. So now, time to put it all back together, put some oil in, give it a run. Hopefully you can see behind the forward gear is actually the gear selector mechanism. I'll just go and rotate it and show you that. So you can see it rotates around like this, but it needs the flat face facing forward. So what I'm going to do is make sure it's in the right orientation. I don't want it sideways, like that. I want it facing forward, and I'm going to lift it up so it's in the forward gear position, so it's not putting any pressure on that selector rod at all. Now I've got the grease around here again. I'm going to put our new gear selector push rod in. And then put that whole unit in. As I do these two bolts up, I'm going to keep an eye on them from the side here, just to make sure I do them up evenly and I keep the bearing carrier as straight as possible as it goes in. Now I've got the gap closed up, I'm just going to tighten it up to won't come undone again Newton meters, and then we'll leave it. Alright, this seems to be holding pressure quite nicely. So let's put some oil in. With this outboard in particular, it has to be in forward in order to see this point where the roll pin goes through to connect the gear selector. So I've got the forward control in forward now and the gearbox in forward as well. You can see here, as you push it up, this gear selector is naturally coming beside the rod here that it needs to mate with and have the pin through, so I've just got to pull this over a bit, sort of help guide it in. Now I've got the gearbox bolted in place, I'm going to put this roll pin through this coupling here, which is between the upper and the lower part of the gear selector. To do that, I normally just use a pair of sort of multi-grips just to pull it in like a clamp essentially. As a bit of a tip, I'm going to poke a rag in here because I have had situations where I've gone to put this in, dropped it down inside the gearbox, had to take all 6 bolts back out, put all 6 bolts back in to fetch it out again, so you don't want that. Sometimes you can give them a bit of a light push and they'll stay. This one's a little bit troublesome, so I might actually try and just tap it in with a hammer to get it started. Now that's started, I'll just get these in a bit and just squeeze it in. And just push it in the rest of the way. Might just need 2 hands to push it in all the way, but you get the idea. In case you're wondering, yes, I did put oil in it. Now I'm just going to hook up the earmuffs and we'll give it a run. Alright, so I think we can almost consider that gearbox fixed. The reason I say almost is that because until a boat's in the water, sometimes the boat will go into gear on the stand on the earmuffs, you put it in water, and with that extra pressure against the prop, it actually won't stay in gear. So it's a good sign, it's much better than it was when it arrived, that's for sure. So not really till I get it on the water we'll know 100%, but so far it's looking good. I hope this video helps you understand how the gear selector, the push rod, the dog clutch, all that sort of works together. And I also hope it helps you if you have this particular problem as well. So thanks for watching, please rate, comment and subscribe, and if you want to follow along with things that happen in between the videos, also subscribe to Dangastu on Instagram. Alright, see ya.